Welcome to the panel discussion of the 6th Annual Ray and Mary Giles Symposium on Citizenship and Public Service here at the University of Science and Arts of Oklahoma. My name is John Bruce, and I am Professor of Language and Literature here at USAO. The overall theme of today's panel discussion involves nutrition and sustainable food production and consumption in Oklahoma.
A little bit about us: we make everything from scratch, and our supervised childcare area that you mentioned earlier, we have an area within our restaurant where parents can drop off their kids and they can play. It has full-size playhouses for imaginary interactive play. You can go in and pretend that you're at home, or you can go in and pretend that you're grocery shopping, or take your dog to the vet, or go to the sporting goods store and check out a hula hoop so that you can play while your parents are having their date night. We've got a movie room in there. A lot of the smaller farms that we use, the people who come and knock on my back door and say, "Hey, I've got 75 pounds of okra. Do you want it?" There are probably 5 of those people that are going to come see me on the same day. And I really wish that some of them could have come last week, or that some of them might come next week, but they've got 70 pounds today, and we've got to figure out something to do with that. And we try and buy as much of that produce as we can. But it's challenging to run a restaurant where the availability is strange like that. On the flip side of that, a lot of small farms are not equipped to do the volume that we need. I buy all of Ray's eggs every single week, and some weeks he's got 30 dozen, and some weeks he's got 100 dozen. It depends on how hot it is, how his chickens feel. There's lots of variety in what happens there, but a lot of farms just aren't equipped to do the volume that I need. I might need 100 dozen eggs a week, and you've got 10, and you've got 10, and you've got 10, and you've got 10. But not very many people have 100. So that's one of our challenges. That comes back around to distribution. A lot of small farms do not have a way to adequately distribute their food to places that aren't really close to them. You know, we do local food, and for us that means in the state of Oklahoma. Some of our farms are 2 or 3 hours away, and it's hard for someone who works and lives on a farm and gets their living from food to be able to spend a day and drive 3 hours to bring me watermelons or chickens or whatever it might be, and then get back and actually do the work of the farm. And so that's a big challenge for us.
I have 2 restaurants, one in the city and one a couple of miles just north of the city. It's an old Rockefeller estate that was built at the turn of the century. And Mr. Rockefeller converted the old dairy farm into a restaurant, a farm, an 80-acre mixed-use farm with animals and vegetables, and an education center, all in one. So the question I always get asked is while you're practicing nutritious food, while you're an advocate of sustainable farming, while you're supporting the local agriculture because it's right there, and we're supporting a lot of other farms too, you are doing it in the backdrop of the Rockefeller family. We have a thriving farm that produces not just for the restaurant but for the general public, that is an organic farm. Just to make a side note, but he said, "I want to make sure that I'm growing barley from my chickens." Now, that's very unusual for a farmer who is raising chickens to also be growing the feed for the chickens. So when we talk about an organic system, a truly organic system, organic came from what? From organism, from a whole. So you're not parts of the system, you're entire. An organism is a whole system. And if you are truly organic, then you are truly dealing with a whole system. And if you're raising chickens, but importing the feed for the chickens from far away, you are not dealing within the constraints of an organism. And so you don't need to be a Rockefeller, you don't need to have a lot of money, I don't think, to support a system like the one I described. In fact, you can have these disparate parts, a farm some type of educational entity. You're sitting in one as well, of course. And a restaurant that I think is vitally important, a chef or a restaurant that brings this together, because there is nothing like a good menu and is a further way to engage people through delicious food, which is key to this whole movement.
As a member of the President's Council on Physical Fitness, Sport, Exercise, and Nutrition, are we making an impact?
I never even knew the full name of it.
Well, it's pretty historic,
Yeah,
and
it
I'm
is.
older than
Yeah.
the committee. Are we making an impact on the health of children in schools? Michelle Obama has tried to make a public statement about it, and how do you feel about the impact we're making on obesity and the population in general?
Yeah, I would love to ask you, because you have a historical perspective, as you mentioned, and my perspective is quite short in the sense that I think the First Lady has spoken about an issue that's incredibly difficult to talk about. I think she put herself in an unenviable position of looking like the policeman or policewoman of the U.S. I'm not here to defend her, although I admire her greatly, and I think the work that the council, that the president to a certain extent, and that she's doing is really important. And I get the sense when I travel that people think of her as the worst kind of nitpicking mother, and that she shouldn't be involved in the daily diet of the American public. And when you have 40% of the U.S. population either grossly obese or obese, and you have diet-related diseases on a rise that we haven't seen in the course of human history, when you understand projections that are just unanimous that this is going to affect the overall economy and the ability of America to maintain its economic superiority around the world, even its intellectual superiority, you start to realize that what she is going out on a limb to make people recognize is important enough that we should be supporting it. It's that we have in our culture this understanding now that we can intervene in sickness, and we should be putting our money and our time and our passion and our energy towards correcting disease or sickness instead of prevention. We have in our culture this understanding now that we can intervene in sickness, and we should be putting our money and our time and our passion and our energy towards correcting disease or sickness instead of prevention.
Is eating in season and locally really possible in Oklahoma? Is it possible without having, I think part of the key is knowing how to preserve, knowing how to freeze things, having a whole skill set. I don't know how this applies in restaurants. I'm certainly thinking as a home cook or a home gardener, how do you stretch our growing season so that you're not eating from Walmart 4 months out of the year and from your garden the other months? And how do we teach people that? How do you learn it? It's a huge knowledge gap for more than one generation in our country, I think. So I just wondered if anybody wanted to address any part of that.
Well, I'll tell you what we do. We, at the restaurant, have learned about a lot of vegetables that we didn't know existed. I mean, that I didn't know existed. Maybe our chef did and knew all about it. But learning more about you think vegetables and you think broccoli, green beans, corn, whatever, carrots. And that's kind of where a lot of people come from. But there are so many things outside of that grow year round. And knowing what those seasons are and what does grow during the winter is part of that. Also knowing what you said about preserving things, canning things, freezing things, and how that works. When you're in college, I assume that most of you don't have a big deep freeze in your dorm room. And so that it can be a challenge, but learning a little bit about what is here, what grows here. The farmers market at OSU OKC runs year round, does it not, Larry? Yes. And so there are people who have things all year round that they are growing locally. Also for us at the restaurant, in the winter time, and I think that people in general, if we go back to talking about eating like grandma ate, you rely a little more heavily on your proteins in those lean months than you do on your leafy green vegetables. I can get a chicken any month of the year. I can get a cow any month of the year. And so thinking about changing the way you eat a little bit so that in those times when, you know, all there is kale, and you've seen kale for weeks on end, that you look back and use your chicken a little bit differently at that time.
And earlier, Larry and I were talking about the Cooperative Extension Service, which there are agents in every county, is an excellent source of information about preservation, and they continue to teach safe preservation methods, and that, of course, the information is for free.
Does it cost you more to grow organic than it would if you use pesticides and fertilizers and stuff?
I'm not an economic, economist, and I haven't farmed conventionally, and I haven't done all but what I think is, yeah, it's more expensive to be organic.
You know, I would say like there's never been a better time now to get involved with these issues. When I started, which, you know, I'm going to sound like my grandfather, but really nobody was talking about these issues. And so it was quite difficult to convince somebody to give you money. My first restaurant had nothing to do with the Rockefellers. It was just me and my brother, and you know, it was a different atmosphere. For New York, it's a little bit easier with restaurants because there's always sort of a demand. But if you're out here, I can't imagine that if you have a solid idea, you can't with the advances of I mean, when I opened up Blue Hill, the internet was just going. I mean, websites were just happening. It's like there's so many ways now to get your message out and become you know, one of my friends, he's become a friend, but he used to cook for me, and now he is with his girlfriend. They didn't want to cook anymore. They wanted to have their own restaurant. They didn't have money. They were gathering money, saving money. It's very expensive in New York. But in Brooklyn for the last 6 months, he's approached different restaurants that have a kind of cafes that do business during the day and don't do a big business at night. And he pays them to take over the restaurant at night and do pop-ups. Do you have pop-ups out here? Yeah. So he does this incredibly interesting thing where once a week, it's every Tuesday night, and they have a very distinctive, it's all local produce, but it's all vegetable driven. He has some meat, it's not vegetarian, it has some meats going on in the menu, but you get like 12 courses. It's him and his wife, they cook the whole thing. They source from the farmer's market. And they were just written up in the New York Times last week, a huge article. They're packed now. I just spoke to him last Tuesday, line out the door. And he said 2 people called to invest in opening a restaurant. So that's New York. That crap happens over there. But you know, I think you can do the same thing here, because in a college town, it's really easy you have to find the right niche. But there's always a niche. And like you know what they did, I thought they were nuts. You know, I just thought it was crazy. But they really found 5 store owners who were just like, yeah, you want to bring people here at night? Sure, I don't have any business at night. And they did it. And within a year, they have already money flowing in to start. They have a really big following. It's incredible. So I find it really inspiring. I bet you could do the same thing here.